He lives in a pineapple under the sea and together with a long list of fellow Bikini Bottomites. He's been a staple of children's lives all across the world. But not everyone in this jellyfish-infested underwater wonderland has the best of intentions. For all the good-natured nautical nonsense that the show has to offer, like the real world, Bikini Bottom's residents exist on a moral spectrum. I'm Kyle with Wicked Binge, and it's time to drop on the deck and flop like a fish as we put one of the best Nick Toons under the microscope and investigate the morality of these underwater characters. This is Good to Evil Spongebob Squarepants.
All in the line of duty, Mr. Krabs.
Our pick for the most good character has to go to Mermaid Man. Truly a character who has a real sense of justice. Well, maybe more so before he went senile. But he's still a character who cares deeply for justice. Although he isn't capable of much now, given his age and mental state, he has a passion for good and fighting crime. And frankly, a long history of being a superhero since his younger days. You can't take that away from him. And even in his old age, he's still out there doing what he can to make the world a better place. As little as that is. Mermaid Man, you've earned your spot in the Superhero Hall of Fame. We salute you. Next, we have Princess Mindy, who was featured in the first SpongeBob movie. Her love of all underwater creatures means that she's one of the most caring and good characters in the SpongeBob universe.
Look at this little guy.
Voiced by Scarlett Johansson, she's the daughter of King Neptune and the voice of reason in the castle. She shows far more compassion towards her subjects than her father and uses her mermaid magic to help the sea creatures get over their fears.
With my mermaid magic.
Of course, she's not actually magical, as we find out in the movie, and this is all a ruse. But it's a lie with positive intentions, so we really can't hold it against her. For our third good pick, we have Gary the Snail. Gary has helped out all across Bikini Bottom, having taken on the role of a DJ, a bouncer, a cashier at SpongeBob's restaurant, and a waiter at the Krusty Krab. That's super helpful for a pet.
Meow.
He's the ever-loyal friend to SpongeBob, and he's even an animal rights advocate. The truth is, we don't really have anything bad to say about the little guy. Although I suppose he is a bit of a glutton. Next up is Sandy Cheeks. As an air breather, she's forced to live in an underwater dome and to wear a helmet whenever she's in town. She's by far one of the most level-headed and caring characters in the show, and probably the most loyal of all of SpongeBob's friends. But it's worth noting that there is also a darker side to Sandy. She's a proud Texan, and anyone who says ill about the state will feel her wrath. And as a scientist, she has a tendency to set up situations to see how others will react, sometimes bordering on unethical.
Just putting the finishing touches on my new invention.
One time she fed an experiment to the patrons of the Krusty Krab with unfortunate results. She also knows how to talk SpongeBob into doing things that he's not so keen on.
You have to be willing to do anything.
Truthfully, if Sandy represented a sin, it would be pride. But she's also incredibly well-intentioned, honorable, and loyal to her friends. She's the one you would go to if you needed help. In addition to being there for her friends, she's also incredibly forgiving when it comes to SpongeBob and Patrick's shenanigans. Or, unless she's hibernating. Now we move on to the star of the show, Spongebob Squarepants.
Smoky.
This joyful, upbeat, and positive sea sponge is, in fact, a bit self-obsessed and reckless. He's caring, and his intentions are almost always good, but his consequent actions don't always necessarily manifest in that way. His behavior, along with Patrick's, is a constant annoyance for Squidward, and he gets Mrs. Puff arrested on numerous occasions because of his lack of concentration when driving. He tends to make a massive deal out of unimportant problems, like when he lost his name tag, and he's so overconfident that it grates on everybody.
I lost my name tag.
With all that said though, he is kind-hearted and does his best to help out those around him. He's someone who finds joy wherever he goes, and so desperately wants to share that positivity, even with those who don't want it. Now, throughout the series, he has been arrested 7 times, mainly for theft and being a public nuisance, and even Santa called him a menace in spite of his good nature, which kind of summarizes him perfectly. None of this negativity is intentional though. SpongeBob doesn't have a bad bone in his body.
Thanks for the lies, Mr. Fairy Tale.
Well, as a sponge, he doesn't really have any bones, but he just simply doesn't have the self-awareness to know when he's doing harm. His treatment of Squidward is usually born from wanting to make him happy, and in a lot of ways, he represents a hedonistic pursuit of fun. Despite mostly liking him, the residents of Bikini Bottom find his antics annoying, so much so that in the episode Gone, they organize a national No SpongeBob Day that even Patrick takes part in.
A whole day dedicated to getting away from you.
His games also have a habit of going way too far, such as when he tricked a lifeguard into thinking that he was dying, or when he sabotaged Squidward so he could become the employee of the month.
You can't win that award if you don't get up for work.
Or when he made fun of Sandy for not being able to do everything that the underwater creatures could. There's definitely a small villainous side to our favorite sponge. He helped Mr. Krabs poison a health inspector, tortured Patrick on a number of occasions, and once shrunk the entire town and kept them in a jar. He may be fun, exciting, and the star of the show, but SpongeBob certainly isn't a saint. He should still be your first port of call in Bikini Bottom though. He means well, and he'll definitely show you a good time. We talked about Mermaid Man, so we can't forget about Barnacle Boy. Yes, he's a veteran superhero too, well, a sidekick anyway. But Barnacle Boy seems to have a much more cranky and negative attitude, and we can't forget that at one point he even jumped ship to the evil side. Granted, this is in response to years of Mermaid Man treating him as a child, but he quickly patches things up and returns to the side of righteousness as Barnacle Man. So we can't dock him too many points.
I knew this was a bad idea.
Next up is Pearl Krabs.
Unacceptable!
Mr. Krabs' daughter, and also probably the biggest character on the list, because she's a whale. She's yet to take on any of the questionable traits of her father, Mr. Krabs, and works as an assistant at a store in the Bikini Bottom Mall. Pearl is well-meaning and optimistic, but she's still a child, so can get overdramatic and extremely emotional in an instant. She uses her cleverness to manipulate her father, who, when he normally would be angry at her overspending, has no choice but to give in to her demands. The biggest problem with Pearl is that she seems to think that the world revolves around her, and that she routinely throws fits whenever she doesn't get her way. Certainly a selfish character at times. Next up, we're throwing in Larry the Lobster, which might be a little surprising given the fact that he was an early source of SpongeBob's insecurity, all due to his muscles.
Even your cramps have cramps.
But you gotta admit that Larry's personality is very positive and happy. That said, he's revealed to be a bit cowardly in the episode A Life in a Day, and he also treated his own parents with disrespect when he removed them from the beach for being unsightly.
But you guys are way too old and unsightly for my beach.
Although he did do this in his usual polite manner. Larry suffers from much of the same pride that Sandy suffers from, but darn it, he's just so cool and likable. Okay, on to Mrs. Puff, SpongeBob's boating school instructor. While we see her as the ever-patient teacher to SpongeBob's mayhem, Mrs. Puff has a dark history, one full of mischief and criminal acts, becoming a full-time bank robber when her first boating school failed. She's been to jail more often than any other characters in the show, but in her defense, it's often because of SpongeBob. The pufferfish begins as an eternally patient character, but grows more and more angry and annoyed as the series progresses. Often seen avoiding responsibilities and even seeking solace in prison time to avoid the stresses of the outside world.
No more SpongeBob, no more road rage, no more SpongeBob.
But we can't overlook her past as a bank robber. She still keeps her mask handy in case things take a turn for the worse again. While Patrick Star is oftentimes well-meaning, SpongeBob's best friend and closest neighbor is lazy, dim-witted, lacking manners, and ignorant, which serves to annoy virtually everyone who spends enough time with him. Patrick has an extremely short temper and often disrupts events because he feels he hasn't been paid enough attention. In Valentine's Day, for example, he ruined the carnival because he didn't receive a present. Patrick lacks the confidence of other characters mainly because he's not as intelligent as them, and this leads to jealous behavior from him whenever someone else succeeds.
No danger here.
In Big Pink Loser, he remodels his home after SpongeBob's to get a chance to live like him. And he's even driven to plastic surgery in No Nose Nose to stop being the only one who doesn't have a nose. Patrick's a follower. He has a temper and he jumps onto other people's schemes to fit in. But he never quite knows when to stop, so usually takes things way too far. He also has a cruel mean streak, which can be targeted at anyone.
Take a bath, Fleabag.
In Pet Sitter Pat, he nearly kills innocent Gary with a flamethrower. That said, the starfish does possess loyalty to his friends and usually comes around in the end. If compassion is something that you're looking for, then Patrick is probably not the one that you'll get it from. But for unending loyalty to the point of stupidity, then he's your guy. Putting up with SpongeBob and Patrick would be testing for the best of us. So it's unfortunate for poor Squidward Tentacles that he got stuck living next to him.
Could it be? SpongeBob is gone for the evening?
In fact, his Easter Island head home wasn't always next to the famous pineapple. He used to have a nice garden out front until the fruit fell from the surface and was immediately inhabited by the annoying sponge. It probably couldn't have happened to a more deserving person though. Squidward is self-obsessed and thinks he's better than everyone else. He hates his job at the Krusty Krab and has at least 492 self-portraits throughout his house. He's narcissistic, sarcastic, rude, grumpy, and would much prefer spending time alone than in the company of others.
I am Bikini Bottom's greatest artiste.
He goes to great lengths to get rid of SpongeBob and is obsessed with his quest for fame, even if it means taking credit for something that someone else has done. He took credit for creating the David statue, for example, to impress an art appraiser when it was in fact SpongeBob who made the statue. And he's always putting other people's talents down, making fun of others' bubble-blowing abilities or artistic creations.
That's the lamest idea I have ever heard.
He gets incredibly jealous of other people's success, but he's not very good at anything himself. His clarinet playing is dreadful, and he takes out his own insecurities on everyone else. While he's constantly miserable about his lot in life, the truth is he brings it on himself. He could very easily look for another job or move away from his loud and obnoxious neighbors, but instead he chooses to just complain. We will say, however, that when SpongeBob's feelings were hurt by the guy that he delivered the pizza to, Squidward stuck up for him. So underneath all of his awful personality, Squidward does have a teeny tiny bit of compassion. Moving on to Bubble Bass. Best known for lying about SpongeBob messing up his order, knowing full well how detrimental it would be to the friendly fry cook. Bubble Bass is lazy, dishonest, totally selfish, and even cowardly, running away with his fins caught between his legs when finally called out on his dishonesty. Next, we have Man Ray and the Dirty Bubble. Although neither of these characters ever really accomplish anything, they're worth noting for the simple fact that they pride themselves as villains and commit all sorts of crimes, including bank robbery. But really, both of these characters are pretty much goofballs who really suck at crime. Next up, we have King Neptune. Yes, he may be the king and god of the sea, but this dude has a serious power trip going on.
You're going to be a god and like it!
Most notably, he tried to kill Mr. Krabs, who was falsely accused of stealing his crown. Now, although Mr. Krabs is guilty of a lot, he was innocent in this case. And you would think that a king might be better at delivering justice fairly. He also repeatedly burned Patrick in the Neptune spatula episode, and he also locks his own son, Triton, in a cage when he realizes he doesn't want to be a god like his dad. That said, he's not all bad, and reveals himself to have a softer side after everything is said and done. Now, we can't talk about evil SpongeBob characters without mentioning the Flying Dutchman.
I am the Flying Dutchman!
After all, he's kind of the demon of the sea. He's been known to steal people's souls for fun, and of course, his threats to banish people to Davy Jones' locker. But as sadistic as he may seem, it's worth mentioning that he does seem to have another side. He's actually known to have a strong sense of justice and even rewards those for good deeds in certain situations. He's also shown to keep his promises. For example, he granted 3 wishes to SpongeBob and the gang in exchange for, a sock.
And I'll give you 3 wishes.
To be honest, we think that the Dutchman is lonely and bored. And underneath his crusty, seemingly evil exterior is a guy who just wants a friend. Maybe. Next up is Squilliam, someone so annoying and pretentious that we actually start to feel bad for Squidward. Squilliam is mean, arrogant, selfish, and takes legitimate pleasure in watching the failures of others. Especially Squidward's.
Just succeeding in everything you failed in.
He's someone who thinks he's better because of his wealth and status, and although he may not be responsible for the most destruction, he's undoubtedly an awful person. Or squid. Honestly, Squilliam and anyone else past him on the list at this point probably deserves to be sent to
Davy Jones' locker!
As we get to the edge of evil, we arrive at Eugene H. Krabs. Money, money, money is all he wants, and as the root of all evil, it leads him to act in selfish and dastardly ways. Sure, he's a loving father to Pearl and cares about SpongeBob and Squidward to an extent, but if they get in the way of him earning that cash, then there's only one choice he's going to make. He'll do almost anything to satisfy his greed and sees all of his customers as walking dollar signs.
You know what they say, money talks.
In the episode Squid's Day Off, this obsession becomes clear as he loses both of his arms and severely injures his head as he's trying to retrieve a dime from the sink. He's forced SpongeBob to serve contaminated burger patties because he hates wasting product, and he's even defiled graves in the quest for wealth. Mr. Krabs routinely abuses his employees and scolds them over anything that would cost him even a few pennies. In one episode, he's shown abusing captured jellyfish so that he can mass-produce jelly.
This isn't what it looks like, SpongeBob.
Let's also not gloss over the fact that he tried to dispose of the health inspector's body after he thought that he killed him.
We gotta get rid of this body before anyone sees it.
On top of everything, Mr. Krabs has sold his soul multiple times to multiple spirits.
Yeah, my immortal soul. I've heard that speech before.
Mr. Krabs is the type of person who would sell out anyone. And there's only one character we can think of who's more evil. Yes, of course, it's Sheldon J. Plankton, Bikini Bottom's ultimate villain. He runs the Chum Bucket, a wildly unsuccessful burger joint, along with his wife, a supercomputer named Karen.
Typical day of failure, I see, huh, darling?
All of his misdeeds are in the aim of retrieving Mr. Krabs' secret Krabby Patty formula, a desire that's led to him being arrested at least 5 times. He's always deceitful, trying to convince SpongeBob and the others that he can be trusted, only to use their goodwill to try and steal from the Krusty Krab.
Yeah, baby! This is it!
In the first movie, he enslaved all of the residents of Bikini Bottom and made them worship him. And this megalomaniacal behavior is always at the root of everything that he does. He's also poisoned his customers on several occasions to cut costs. And in the episode Spongicus, he arranges for Patrick to be eaten by lions. Despite his nefarious behavior, Plankton often gets his comeuppance with near-death experiences such as being electrocuted and often falling victim to his own schemes.
Get back! Wait!
His constant failure almost makes you feel sorry for him, and despite everything that he does, he almost becomes that sympathetic anti-hero that you end up rooting for. Okay, well, maybe not. That almost brings us to the end, but there's one character that's been left out who's worth a mention and is possibly the best example of pure goodness that there is. David Hasselhoff.
I'm David Hasselhoff.
When faced with a race against time to return to Bikini Bottom with King Neptune's crown,
How will we ever get back to Bikini Bottom now?
SpongeBob and Patrick have almost given up hope when the Hoff shows up. Appearing almost robot-like, he motors through the ocean and gets our heroes to their destination with his impressive pecs, basically saving the day and asking for nothing in return. He's the true hero of the movie, and without him, the underwater realm would have been ruled by Plankton forever. So there you have it. Plankton, the nefarious mastermind, is the purest of evil in Bikini Bottom, while Mermaid Man and the Hoff are the shining lights of morality. What do you think? Make sure to let us know in the comments section below, and let us know what cartoon you'd like to see featured on Good to Evil next. Don't forget to like this video, subscribe, and hit that notification bell so you get notifications whenever we upload. But most importantly, stay wicked.